Jesus explains. What forces trigger natural disasters? July 20th and 21st, 1957, message 6875. From Jesus through Bertha Dudde. Spoken by Pascal. With every spiritual gift you receive my proof of love, for you are not to remain in darkness. You are to grow in light and strength, in knowledge and in a strong will to live and act on earth in accordance with that knowledge. For every activity carried out in spiritual blindness, in distorted thinking, is useless for the soul. And since I want your soul to mature on earth, your activity must also be purposeful, which can only be achieved through the light of knowledge. And so I continually give you light where it is still dark within you. I teach you the truth. I pour out my spirit upon you again and again, as long as you hold the open vessel out to me, so that I may fill it, and as long as your heart longs for my message. Many times there are still erroneous thoughts within you, especially when you cannot free yourselves from a body of knowledge or ideas that did not come to you through the Spirit, that cannot be called the work of the Spirit, but was acquired through the intellect and perhaps mixed with spiritual insights, which is why you do not doubt its truth. But it is not pure truth, and therefore you cannot attain complete clarity until you free yourselves from that body of thought, until you are ready to let it go. For only then will there be light within you that radiantly illuminates every corner of your heart. Only he who maintains a constant connection with me will be able to comprehend this. He who immediately recognizes when error seeks to approach him. Because this recognition is the result of the intimate connection with me. And so you too may all free yourselves from error through this intimate bond with me. For then I will not tolerate your moving in erroneous thinking, and I will guide you to the truth in whatever way I can. The creative process requires power. This must be clear to all of you. Power is the outpouring of my love, which is received without resistance. Therefore, only the being who voluntarily opens himself to receive this power, that is, whose will is turned towards me, and who therefore offers me no resistance whatsoever, which would render any outpouring of love on my part ineffective, can engage in creative activity. It follows from this that my stream of love can flow only through those beings who have already joined me, who can no longer be counted among the followers of my adversary, for these still stand in opposition to me. Otherwise, they would no longer be his followers. These beings, then, can participate neither in creation nor in the destruction of what has been created, because they lack any power to do so, precisely because they repel my power through their resistance. But I am always speaking of beings, of self-conscious entities. I am speaking of those once fallen primordial spirits who, as individual beings, began their descent into the depths, and who, as individual beings, must also begin their return to me. However, the once fallen primordial spirits only became self-conscious beings again in the stage of being human, whereas previously, as dissolved spiritual beings, they lacked self-consciousness. Only in this state of self-consciousness can the being, through free will, accept my power of love, or reject it once again, and only in this state can it act creatively or destructively. But now there are also acts of destruction among you humans that lead you to false assumptions. These are the acts of destruction or influences wrought by the forces of nature, by elemental powers, which lead you to believe that the forces of darkness are expressing themselves through them. You must now first be instructed as to what these forces of nature fundamentally are, whose will and power they are subject to. You must know that I allow all spiritual beings a certain freedom, provided they have already worked their way up somewhat in the state of necessity, and may now be temporarily unbound. That is, if they had to leave a form prematurely and have not yet entered into a new form. Thus, human beings have intervened contrary to my lawful order. The spiritual entity that has been set free rebels against the unlawfully interrupted course of its development and rages, and it is rightfully entitled to do so, for premature liberation is not true freedom for the spiritual entity, but rather torment, for which it seeks vengeance against humanity, which had brought this torment upon it. This becomes particularly noticeable when, out of greed or avarice, the lifespan of plant creations is shortened, when normal growth is hindered, when, through human will, natural creations are destroyed, which, according to my plan of creation and salvation, serve a purpose, and thereby the fulfillment of their purpose is unlawfully prevented. The same applies when useful earthly creations, that is, those erected by human hands, are maliciously destroyed, so that the spiritual bound within that matter is prematurely released from it. And so I do not prevent this spiritual essence from now acting elementally in its union, but I also set only a certain time for it, in order to bind it again for the purpose of further development. However, massive manifestations of power, such as those evident in natural disasters, must be explained and evaluated differently. I am aware of the degree of resistance from all that is spiritual, and thus I also know when it begins to subside, when that which is bound in solid matter can endure a loosening of its bonds. These spiritual beings test their strength by uniting to break their bonds. Since the resistance to the power of love, which until now has enveloped them in the form of matter, has already weakened, the power of the spiritual has also grown stronger to the same degree. And I now do not prevent this spiritual from forcibly creating its next form of development for itself. I therefore permit the spiritual, which is still completely immature, to free itself prematurely from its previous state, which occurs in the form of natural disasters of minor or even major magnitude, eruptions, earthquakes, that is, such natural disasters that originate within the earth and are thus to be regarded as expressions of the power of the spiritual bound within it. However, this is by no means a destructive impulse, as a sign of increased opposition against me, and thus the work or influence of my adversary, but it is merely the impulse towards a different, easier form of transformation, unaware of the essential being, but naturally awakening in the spiritual as resistance subsides, which I therefore do not oppose, because this spiritual will be bound again for further development, in order to draw closer to me, step by step. It may seem to you humans as though the forces of my adversary are at work. However, he himself cannot alter or destroy my works of creation, and all such events are attributable to my will and my power. Yet they all simultaneously serve a spiritual purpose, even if countless human lives are sacrificed to them. For even the spiritual being still bound within the earthly creations is given the opportunity to continue upon its path of development. And the ending of a person's earthly life also has its justification, and my love and wisdom truly allow nothing to come to harm, so that everything will be to the benefit of the soul of the individual person concerned. And so, what man regards as misfortune need not be a calamity, unless he thereby loses his faith and surrenders himself completely to the power of my adversary. But then he was already his follower beforehand of his own free will, and he may just as easily change his will, precisely because he is free. However, any natural phenomenon that causes devastation or destruction can only involve spiritual forces that are either still bound in the most solid form and seeking to free themselves, or that have been unlawfully released from a lighter form and are now running amok because their course of development was prematurely interrupted. However, spiritual beings acting on behalf of my adversary can never express themselves in such a destructive manner, because these beings, who are self-aware, possess no power for such activity. Earthly creations are indeed the domain of my adversary, because his followers are bound within them. Yet they are governed solely by my will, and everything that is bound is subject to my law. Amen.